I live in Arizona. Everybody thinks they understand Arizona until they get here, and then they're amazed at all that they don't understand. And even then, unless you're here for a very long time and have a chance to really poke your nose into everything, you're really not going to see everything there is to see. I will point out a fact that you may not be aware of. There are black bears in Arizona. Black bears, like you think of Jellystone Park, you think of Yellowstone or the mountainous parks of Colorado or Wyoming or Idaho, Washington State. Black bears, you think of black bears in places like that, but there are black bears in Arizona. Quite a few of them. Not here where I live. I live in the Sonoran Desert. I live in the low desert where you associate the saguaro cactus. Massive quantities of cactuses, coyotes, snakes, lizards, and Chicagoans is what we have here. But in the mountains, they have black bears. No kidding, there are black bears in the mountains of Arizona, and quite a few of them, as a matter of fact. And until lately, they've lived a very natural existence. Arizona is massively underpopulated. If you're watching the range wars of the West that are being undertaken in Nevada and Utah right now, Arizona is next, I promise you, in these conflagrations, because Arizona is 17% privately owned, 16 or 17% privately owned. In fact, most of the state is owned by either the federal government, officially sanctioned entities of the federal government like Indian nations, and the state government, and most of the land is not privately owned. And in consequence, there's almost nobody here. There's 5 million people in Arizona. It's not a populous state by any means. There are 300 million people in the United States, and less than 2% of them live in Arizona. A lot of wide open spaces, plenty of room for those bears in the habitats they populate, and so they've had a very normal experience until relatively recently, but all those things change. Arizona's bears have become addicted to trash. They like state and national parks because state and national parks have lots of trash cans in them, and the trash cans are there because the parks have lots of tourists, and the tourists are there because they need something to do with their Saturday, and they stop at KFC on the way and eat a third of what they bought and dump the rest in the trash can, and later that day it's a feast for bears. The bears eat nothing but trash. They don't eat the foods associated with their natural normal diet. All they eat is trash. And because all they eat is trash, they're gaining weight like crazy. That we don't ever think of an overweight organism except for a human being. Human beings and their pets are the only organisms that you will ever find who are overweight systemically. In other words, where you can find a high number of living overweight specimens who are nevertheless managing somehow to persevere. This you do not find in the wild, and the reason for that is that a creature in the wild who is overweight or who is slowed down in any way in his flight behavior is food, is dinner for a predator. That a overweight raccoon is a former raccoon, an overweight squirrel is a former squirrel. The interesting thing about bears is that they're big and they're very well suited to conflict, and so the predators that might eat these overweight bears, there are mountain lions in Arizona, there are obviously packs of coyotes, we have Mexican gray wolf populations that are resurgent because of the influences of environmentalists. Lots of really interesting predators living in these mountains, but they're all kind of focused on things smaller than them. The mountain lions in particular could easily take a bear if they wanted to, or a pack of coyotes, a pack of wolves plausibly could take a bear if they wanted to, but they don't. They're not eating these overweight bears, and in consequence, the bears are not suffering any penalty for making this change in their diet. They're not suffering any sort of direct penalty to individual bears who are caught out and devoured by wolves or whatever, and they're not suffering any consequences in terms of their numbers. In other words, they're not being picked off by predators one by one and thus reducing the breeding population. And so in a circumstance like this is the perfect Malthusian environment. This is what Malthus and all of the population bomb, the world will end Tuesday because of the population bomb types. This is the environment that they're most interested in, is a perfect breeding environment where there are no external perils to life. So if you imagine yeast in a cask of wine, the yeast have a perfect breeding environment in that there's an unlimited food supply in the form of all the sugar in the wine. Unlimited food supply and therefore unlimited breeding opportunity. And we know the story of what happens to yeast. The yeast breed to the level of food supply and die having been intoxicated upon their own poisons, their own excrement, as it were. The waste that they excrete as a result of their biological processes builds up on them, and they perish. They run out of food and die amidst an oversupply of their own poisons. This is the perfect environmentalist metaphor. They love this metaphor. They love the Malthusian argument, however it's made. This is call it the Malthusian argument. It's Malthus who first made this argument, and you hear it over and over and over again. It's always the boojum under the bed. It's the massive overpopulation that results from unlimited food supply with no corresponding increase in external causes of death. So here we have with these bears in the mountains of Arizona, we have this perfect Malthusian breeding environment. We would expect to see a population boom, at least the Malthusians. Sorry, I have an itchy nose. The Malthusians would lead us to expect a population boom because unlimited food supply, no predators, why not? What happens, in fact, what's really happening is the bears have basically stopped breeding. It's maybe a function of their added corpulence. It may be a result of the sort of physical torpor, the natural indolence that results from carrying too much weight, or it may be just that the things that they're eating are not appropriate, are so inappropriate to their diet that they don't follow through on other activities that would be also appropriate to the nature of a bear. But in any case, they're breeding a heck of a lot less. Just their natural rut, the estrus process, is a lot less intense, and it results in fewer pregnancies. This is complicated by the fact that mama bears are miscarrying, I guess is what you'd call it, that the pregnancies are ending prematurely and not with live births in one way or another. Call them miscarriages, spontaneous abortions, I don't care what you call them, but the rate of impregnation is down, and the rate of prenatal or natal mortality is substantially up, to the extent that of the pregnancies that do result, over 50% end in no live birth, that fewer bears are born with each new spring, and each new spring results in even fewer bears. Complicating all this, the crazy things that they're eating out of the garbage can, they're dying a lot younger. They're carrying all this extra body weight, and it is a strain on the system, and the bears just don't live as long as they used to. They don't breed as much. They're, the years that they're actively breeding are fewer in number. The pregnancies that result from their breeding are fewer in number. The number of pregnancies that result in a live birth are fewer year by year, and they're dying younger. And as icing on the cake, the young little bear cubs that are born, the mothers are not schooling them, as it were. Organisms are born with a built-in survival mechanism, and yet obviously more complex organisms have a certain learning process. They have to master that. You can see it all kinds of different ways, that falcons learning how to hunt, having to learn how to hunt. They know what it is they want to eat, and they know how to do it, and yet they still have to master it, just like anything else. There's a theory and practice. I mean, there's no conceptual abstract learning going on here, but even the survival behavior of a higher animal must be mastered as a matter of training. And the mama bears have stopped engaging in this kind of training with their younglings. And so the young are not only growing up eating nothing but garbage, they never really learn how to eat anything else. They know that other things are food because they have, you know, whatever race memory, whatever you want to call it, they have some sort of instinctual knowledge of what is food for them, and yet they ignore all of that, and they never learn how to acquire that kind of food, and all they ever eat is garbage. The parent generation at least knew how to survive in the wild, but the next generation really doesn't. The next generation is thoroughly habituated to nothing but garbage. Essentially, they're not raised as bears at all. They're just raised as garbage eaters. Unless you're much older than me, you have lived your whole life being lectured about ecology and the environment by the high priest of that particular church. And if you dispute that it's a church, believe me, I can take it apart in no time. You saw me take apart all of science in the last 2 weeks. The environmental movement is child's play by comparison. It's a kiddie pool for really faulty minds. People who reason badly and yet need to make a living in the rent-seeking business of academia, either end up in the School of Education or are associated in some way or another with the environmental movement. And the environmental movement is the perfect church for these kind of zealots, because they can yell at you all day, just like the dumbass guy in the three-quarter raincoat pounding on his Bible and yelling at people at the bus station. They can yell at you all day and you'll put up with it. You think that they're right and that you're wrong. You've never actually thought about any of it. You don't have any informed opinion on this, and yet you believe you do, and you believe that they're yelling at you is somehow morally justified, and you're putting up with it, not yelling back, and not rejecting it, not walking away in disgust, but putting up with it in penance. You believe that that's morally righteous. You believe you deserve that punishment, and you're happy to take it because, of course, being yelled at is much, much easier than actually doing something. You don't intend to do anything. You think you're at fault for not doing anything, and yet you don't intend to actually do anything. So the price that you pay for this cognitive dissonance is getting yelled at for a little while, and you resent getting yelled at, and you think that your resentment makes everything right. This would be a cargo cult. This would be magical thinking. All of this is magical thinking. And of course, environmentalism is 100% based on ridiculously, stupidly, unbelievably badly informed magical thinking. But certainly you've spent your whole life being hectored about threatened species, endangered species. We can't build this because the spotted owls will be endangered, and we can't do that because purple-crested salmon darter will lose its habitat forever. These are ridiculous arguments made by environmentalists. Why would a minor amount of real estate development or property development of one sort or another, a pipeline or something like that, or a railroad track or a freeway or something like that, going through completely uninhabited desert or other uninhabited land, going through wilderness, why would that pose such a threat to a particular species of owls or salamanders or whatever? Because they're ill adapted to their environment and they're going extinct anyway. That's why. There's no, if you want to demonstrate the impact of the unbelievable, indefatigable energy that human beings are willing to invest in eradicating a species, I want you to go out and count cockroaches for a while. That we're not building a freeway that might inadvertently interfere with the habitat of some owl that nobody cares about. We got a six-legged bug that exists by the hundreds of billions everywhere, and all we do is invest incredible amounts of money, time, labor, thought, psychic effort, unbelievable energy trying to eradicate this species, and they're ever more populous every year. That if human beings successfully manage to cause a species to go extinct without actively intending to, like the dodo bird, if we cause a species to go extinct, it's because that species was going extinct anyway. It is not viable. But what about the bears? Why haven't you heard about the bears? Why aren't the environmentalists screeching and screaming like crazy about the bears? Well, could it be because it's their own damn fault? That when they want to talk about spotted owls or salamanders, it's always your fault. It's always the fault of the progress of man. It's always because you want to get somewhere faster. You want something better, faster, cheaper, more convenient. It's your fault. No, it's not. It's the bears' fault. They didn't choose freely because they lacked free will, but nevertheless, they have will, and they express that will as a preference for rotting, salt-infused, overwatered chicken, fried chicken, allegedly fried, mostly boiled and then fried, but they decided they liked KFC better than the diet that nature provided for them. And every peril they were experiencing is a direct result of that preference. So maybe that's why the environmentalists don't want to talk about it. I can give you another reason, and that's because I made all this up. I'm not talking about bears. Bears actually do exhibit many of the pathologies that I'm talking about, but nowhere near in those extremes because nature balances itself. You screw up too badly in nature, you are D-E-A-D, dead. I am not talking about bears, I'm talking about you! I'm not even talking about humanity in general, I'm talking about you. You wonder why it is that I come here every Sunday, sit here and stare at you, hector you, annoy you, ask you all kinds of ugly, uncomfortable questions that you know the answer to perfectly, and yet you don't want to admit you know the answer. Talking to you, for you, about you. So, what is it about you that makes you eat so much of the wrong stuff? What is it about you that makes you pursue reproduction strategies that cannot possibly result in reproduction? What is it that makes you kill? So many of the babies that you actually managed to conceive. Literally, in some demographic groups, over 50% of all pregnancies, not spontaneously aborted, not miscarried, aborted by intention. Over 50% in some demographic groups. An enormous number in every demographic group, but over 50% in some. Obviously, we're dying younger. That's a fun thing to watch, is to watch that curve of human life expectancy go up and up and up and up and up and up until it starts to flatten out. And all of those Michelin people that you see at the mall, people who look like the Michelin Men, they look like they are composed of inflated tires, inflated at the wrist, at the elbow, at the forearm, at the shoulder, inflated all the way up, all the way down, down the chest, down the legs. A creature composed of beautiful white tires. Big, giant manatees. You see them everywhere now. I absolve myself nothing. I'm substantially more slight than I was 3 years ago, but all of America is massively overweight. Much of America is morbidly obese, and that what morbidly obese means is so fat it'll kill you. That's morbidity. This is enough fat to die from. And we're dying from this enormous, not just body fat, but the fat that we're carrying in our moral philosophy everywhere. This is visible on our bodies in the form of this fat, but the fat is just a secondary consequence. It's just an expression of ideas like everything else. Expression of rather continuous expression of ideas, but it's an expression of ideas. The other thing that I mentioned was that the bears stopped educating their young, and thank God they can't do this. This is one thing that animals can't do. That animals can do stupid things, but they can't do anything that stupid. They can't deviate from the harsh and narrow path that nature prescribes for them without going instinct. That animal species on the path of extinction are never stupid. they're just ill-adapted. And if bears stopped teaching their young how to be bears, they would stop being a bear population in no time flat. And obviously, this is what would happen to bears. If the bears in Arizona were exhibiting these behaviors at the degree that I talked about, they would self-annihilate within 3 or 4 generations. There would be no more bears, because while there might be a few bears born, they would be so widely dispersed that they wouldn't be able to find each other in order to breed, even if they wanted to. Even if they wanted to breed like reptiles and have thousands of young, they nevertheless couldn't do it, because they wouldn't be able to find each other, and the population would self-eradicate in no time. This is how extinction occurs, is that you end up with a breeding pool that's too small to sustain the population, and therefore, generation by generation, there are fewer and fewer until there are none left. Interestingly enough, this is what's happening to us. This is what's happening to the human race. It's not obvious at this point. It's not obvious to anybody who's not paying attention to the demography of it, but it's obvious right away when you see it there that in the countries that we call the West, Western Europe, North America, Japan, Australia, the Anglosphere in general, in the countries that we call the West, we have been for quite a while in a state of incipient population decline. To the extent that there's any population growth in the countries of the West, it's coming in the form of immigration. In Western Europe, it's immigrants from Persia, Arabia, from the Indian subcontinent, brown-skinned people from the former British Empire moving to Great Britain or to Western Europe in general, and marrying and having children there, and having children in significant numbers, that there is some sustenance of the population. But if the descendants of the dead white males that we are counseled to hold in great contempt all the time, if the descendants of the white population of Europe and the white settlers of North America, the white settlers of Australia, etc., if that, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant population, if you measured that, their rate of population increase is extremely low, well below the replacement rate. And if you subtract religious subgroups like the Latter-day Saints, the Roman Catholics, subtract those subgroups, what's left, the actual mainline Protestant, whether it's mainline Protestant or Bible-thumping Protestant or whatever, the rest of the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant world is in just a state of self-extermination. The human population of the earth in general is in a state of self-extermination, and the closer a given civilization is to Fifth Avenue, to Barnaby Street in London, to the Champs-Élysées, the closer it is to the very apogee of Western Civ, the lower the birth rate will be. But even in Islam, which until very recently was, Islamic families were pumping out 5 and 6 kids, now it's down to 1 or 2, just like the Germans, just like the Dutch, just like the English, just like the Americans, just like the Japanese. Where are the environmentalists? Why aren't they freaked out about this? A species of owl that may not even be a separate species, but may just be a separate population group, separated from the many, many, many genetically identical owls in that species. That's so desperately important that we can't possibly do anything. We can't do anything at all. We have to shut down the whole mountain. Not even tourists, not even hungry bears, nothing but owls. Why aren't they worked up about the actual self-extermination of the human race? Why aren't they upset about that? Well, the actual reason is because they want it. Marxism is anti-everything. Marxism is anti-life. All of the subgroups of Marxism are superficially differentiated by specious doctrine like feminism or environmentalism, but they are in fact united by their opposition to the human mind as such. And the eradication of the human mind is not dismaying to them, not something to be horrified by, not something to be avidly avoided. To the contrary, it's a fate that they might not hasten, but one that they might not either delay. You should think about that every time you're listening to someone like this, every time you're listening to someone who's yelling at you from an obvious core of Marxism. It's not hard to find Marxism, and if you really can't find it, just identify someone that you think might be a Marxist and watch which protests he goes to. And amazingly enough, he goes to all of them. He's not just an environmentalist, he's also a feminist, and he's also a LGBTQ, whatever the acronym of the day, rights protester, and he's anti-capitalist, and he's anti-U.S. foreign policy, and he's anti-Islamophobia. The left is composed of all kinds of little groups that are in fact all one great big group, and all the little groups show up for each other's events. Every Marxist, every serious, dedicated, lifelong Marxist wants you dead. If you can't be dead, then he wants you jailed. But what he wants is he wants for you to be silenced. That if you can say, you know what, dude, what you're saying makes no sense to me. I don't trust you. I don't want anything to do with you. See you later. As long as you can say that, you're not perfect. You can be perfected. The perfectible human is the one who does as told, offers no objections, and certainly never rebels. Not in speech, and definitely not in any way that counts. The perfect human being, from the point of view of Karl Marx, is a draft animal. That Animal Farm was wonderful in that respect. The perfect human being, from the Marxist point of view, is a dray horse. Hauls what you want and never offers any objection. But it's interesting, isn't it, that for the environmentaloids and all of their Marxist compatriots, all of the people who screech about the environment all the time, the only species for which they have no concern is their own. Is yours, is mine. The only negligible species in the great Gaia of Earth is humanity. In fact, humanity is the problem, that Gaia was good until someone was able to tell the difference between good and evil. And as soon as that was the case, Gaia was spoiled, and the only way to restore her perfection is to remove that self-identifying creature. If you hear the story of Adam and Eve in there, there's a reason for that. All religious stories are the same stories over and over again, and the point of all those stories is that you were wrong until you buy some salvation. That's the point of those stories. That's the point of the environmentalist stories too. They don't want you to do anything. They want you to feel guilty and write a check. That's what they want. If you and your neighbors all decided to go clean up every environmental mess there is, this actually happened in the 60s, that we lived thoughtlessly like Don Draper, until the Ironized Cody and the environmentalists started yelling at everybody, and the American people looked around and said, hey, what? You know what? You're right. We are kind of sloppy about this shit. And they immediately turned around and cleaned up everything that they could clean up. Anything that individual people could clean up directly, they did. I watched this happen when I was a kid. Late 60s, early 70s, this was everywhere. People cleaning up everything. In the air, we had all of these remarkable technological improvements in automobile manufacturing that the environmentalists will tell you that it was the laws that did it, and if you believe that's so, then I want you to pass a law against gravity or rain. What did it was innovation, and if the innovation was goaded by the law, nevertheless the innovation was goaded by profit and by consumer demand. And the air got massively cleaner. I was in Boston in 1975, and every day when I came home, I was roaming around the city. I was really having a time of my life. 15 years old, all on my own in Boston. No kid alive can get to do that today. But every day when I got home, I would take off my shoes, and my ankles were black from all the smoke on the streets, the smoke from the exhaust from the cars. All that's gone. Remarkable, amazing achievements in whatever you want to call it, ecological science, all because people really did want to do something, and they really went out and did it. And so the environmentalists are left bitching about things that no one can prove and no one can document and no one can do anything about. They don't want anybody to do anything about it. They don't want anything to get better. They want to get checks. They want to get paid. That's what they're doing it for. And it's utterly fascinating to see that the only species that they don't care about is ours, is our own species. The species that can go extinct tomorrow and no one will bat an eye is humanity. I think I may be the only person on Earth who actually cares. Me and Mark Stein are the only people on Earth who actually care that the human race is self-exterminating. We put, when we're not putting every species of bug and germ, every species of organism on Earth ahead of our own, when we're not doing that, we're putting every child on Earth ahead of our own children. We always put our own children last, at least in our thoughts. And the reason that we do that is because if we can order things in a satisfactory way in our thoughts, we don't actually have to follow through with our lives. And again, I am not absolving myself of anything. I'm not as fat as I used to be. I'm not as skinny as I'm going to be, but I'm always going to be a fat American. And I was a shitty parent. I was a shitty father. I really wanted to do my best, and I really worked hard at doing my best. And nevertheless, I screwed it up completely. And God bless my children to the extent that they're even my children. God bless my children that they managed to pull it out anyway. And this is one of the wonderful things about being a human being is that your upbringing has to be pretty completely screwed up for you not to turn out okay anyway. That whatever ugly memories and carefully treasured resentments we bring away from childhood, nevertheless, we're all pretty well competent to get the job done. None of us is really as crippled as we want to pretend to be, and as crippled as we want to be when we want to make a mom or dad feel guilty. But it works out. But it's ironic, tragic, absurd that we put our own children last. And yet it's easy to understand when you think about Marxism, because Marxism is fascinating. There have been all kinds of theories about how to seize political power over the centuries, and that's what Marxism is. Marxism is a roadmap to tyranny, a roadmap to a new aristocracy. That Marx saw the old aristocracy, the ancien regime, the aristocracy of royalty, of monarchy, of dukes and counts, principalities. He saw that fall to the liberal idea, to the idea of democracy, of self-rule, and he was horrified by that. Marx was horrified by that because he believed in a hierarchical organization of civilization, and he set about to create a new one with him on top. It's the perfect scam. Marxism is really the perfect scam for rent seekers. That's what it really is a vast collection of unreadable books all about how to be a better, more successful rent seeker, how to vampire off your neighbors and get them to love you for it. That's what Marxism is. But Marxism is power for the lazy. I mean, Alexander, you say what you want about Alexander, he was a hard-working dog. You say what you want about Caesar, that was one hard-working dog. You go read the Bella Gallico, the Gallic Wars, and see everything that Caesar was doing over the course of those 10 years. He was a busy guy, and he was busy every day. Marx was lazy. Marx was a lazy guy. Marx was a lazy guy who hated his father, didn't like that his father lorded the traditional Judeo-Christian work hard, save your money, you'll get ahead in the long run. This is the message that Marx's father and everybody's father preached at that time. And Marx really resented it. He was, you know, a college boy. He was exactly like Pajama Boy. You see Pajama Boy, you were seeing Karl Marx at the age of 23. He was lazy. And this is a characteristic that unites Marxists, is they're lazy. They're lazy people. They're intellectually lazy people. Obviously, they're physically lazy people. They don't want to do anything. They don't want to do any work. That they want to live off of your work. They want to find a way to be a parasite on your effort. But they don't want to work that hard for it. They really don't want to work that hard for it. That you think about how big and how unreadable those books are, and you really want to congratulate them for being willing to endure that kind of punishment for so much nonsense. That stuff is easy to them. They're wordy people. That stuff is easy to them. What they don't want to do is they don't want to think. They don't want to do anything original. They don't want to defend their arguments with any sort of rigor. They don't have any good arguments anyway. Their arguments are terrible. We'll get to that. But they're fundamentally lazy people, and their strategy is that of just a really chiseling kind of con man, sort of what Stirner thought was an egoist, a con man who looks to find some way to climb onto his neighbor's back and ride around with the high view and insist that the high view is necessary. It's vitally necessary for you to carry me around on your back because you need for me to tell you which way we're going. Dogs being ordered around by their own fleas is the way I characterize it, but it's true. It really is the truth. But suppose you're lazy like Marx and all of the Marxist intellectuals, so-called intellectuals who followed him, they're all lazy people. They're all fundamentally lazy people. Suppose you were lazy and you needed to come up with a magical miracle response to the liberal argument, to the argument that human beings are free as a matter of nature, and that each individual human being will prosper best when left alone, and therefore human beings living in a social society, all of them will prosper better, each pursuing his own interests and values and none interfering with the other. That the absolute minimum of interference and the absolute maximum amount of cooperation will result in a civilization that is immeasurably better for each one individual in that society. And even if you want to quibble about exceptions, even then the exceptions are better off in a state of freedom than under any sort of tyranny. And this is stone obvious, and the liberal argument was becoming incontrovertible. People were born in dirt shacks and died in apartments with gas lights, not electric light yet, but they were born in dirt shacks freezing to death, and they died in apartments in the city. They were born walking everywhere in bare feet, and they died taking horse-drawn trams to get to where they wanted to go. They died eating the same food 2 or 3 meals a day for months at a time. And when they died, their choices were unlimited from all over the world. People saw this happening. This was a result of the loosening of the restrictions on human life, the failure of the ancien regime, the failure of monarchy, and the rise of representative government, the rise of the liberal idea. It was remarkable, the change that was going on for everyone in the 19th century. And Marx has got to find some way to reverse all of that, to turn all of that around, and yet he doesn't want to do anything. He doesn't want to do any work. He's a lazy guy. So what does he do? He just turns everything upside down, inverts everything. Don't bother to think anything out. Just say the opposite. He played the opposite game. Whatever you said, he said the opposite. Whatever the age of reason, the industrial age, the responses from the forces of religion to these changes that were going on in society, whatever any of those traditional sources of moral authority said, Marx said the opposite. That's all he did. He just said the opposite. And all of those other Marxists, that's all they do too, is they just say the opposite. So I want you to consider a really important idea. Today is Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. My mother passed away a year ago Christmas, so I don't have a mother to take to brunch this morning. My wife's mother just passed away, and so she doesn't have a mother to take to brunch this morning either. I hope you do. I hope your mother's still alive, and I hope you take her out and treat her right. She deserves it. But the implication of Mother's Day and the attitude we take toward mothers, toward motherhood, toward the mother as the essential parent and the father as the spare parts, totally inverted, totally upside down. The father is the family. This is not tradition. This is not paterfamilias. This is not male chauvinist pig. That's what they said in the 60s when we were cleaning up the waste dump. We were also talking about male chauvinist pigs because we were being infected simultaneously by 2 branches of Marxism. But the father is the family. That without the father there is no family. And this starts, I've talked about this before, this starts with the romantic relationship, that he is the driving force behind that romantic relationship. If he's not driving it, there is no relationship. She marries somebody else. The guy who did keep driving until he drove away in a car festooned with cans. He's the driving force in the marriage. He makes the marriage happen to the extent that the marriage works. He's the driving force. If he's driving the marriage, they're both happy. If he's not driving the marriage, they're both unhappy. Soon divorced, but both unhappy. He's the driving force that behind the marriage, and he's the driving force behind the family. If he wants kids, they're going to have kids. If he doesn't want kids, they're not going to have kids. If he doesn't want kids, she's going to marry somebody else if she wants kids, and she's going to work that out early. But they're his kids. They're his kids. He's married to her because he has to be married to her in order for him to give him his children. And to the extent that those children prosper in the world, their prosperity will be directly related to the involvement of the father in their upbringing. No child can be born without a mother. No child can be nursed without a mother. No child can be succored and suckled and swaddled without a female involved. I'm not denying women anything in this process, because obviously they're absolutely essential. But the driving force behind the existence of those children and behind their ultimate success in the world is the father. And if there is no father, there really is no family. And here again, I absolve myself nothing. I grew up in a single mother household. My mother was all the father I had growing up. I have a father. He's a wonderful man. I have tremendous respect for him, really tremendous respect for him, but he wasn't around when I was young, and I'm rather grateful that he wasn't, because he's like me. He's a big dominating personality, and we would have been Oedipus Rex for my whole childhood. One of us would have ended up dead or gone anyway, so he was gone. It worked out well for me. And at the time that I was growing up, I really thought that what my mother was doing was mothering, and my mother was actually pretty terrible at mothering. I mean, she was a wonderful woman. I mean, really wonderful. I really love her, and I learned so much from her. But she just wasn't that kind of a cuddly, suckling, succoring, swaddling kind of mom. She just wasn't that kind of person. Instead, she was actually pretty masculine in terms of her practicality, in terms of her unwillingness to indulge illusion for emotional purposes. She was not sentimental at all. And I only just recently realized that what she was doing was she was fathering me. I mean, she mothered me while I was young enough to need mothering, but I didn't need mothering from the age of 4 on. I broke away at 4. One of the reasons why I'm so fascinated by the age of 4 and 5 is because it's everything to me. It's when I broke away from everyone else. I became isolated, soul separate, in this all alone, and I knew it at age 4. I didn't need any mothering after that. I needed a certain amount of caretaking because I didn't know what I was doing, but I was self-responsible financially from a very young age, and I was completely self-responsible financially at the age of 17. I didn't need a mother, I needed a father, and I was so lucky to have one in the form of my mother. At the time that I was growing up, single parent families were rare. Single father families, you'd only hear about that if mom died. Single mother families were more common because divorce was becoming more common. My parents were divorced when I was an infant. I have no experience of living with my father until my late teens. I lived with my father for a short while. But my mother did all of that fathering stuff, and thank God she did. But the way it was possible then was that it was rare, and so all of my friends had fathers at home, and all of those fathers were trying to chip in, and I had uncles and my grandfather and my own father, and lots of adult males who were around to try to plug the gap in my fatherless existence. It wasn't really necessary for me, because if anything, I was my own father, but kids in my circumstance when I was growing up had it very different from kids now, because kids now aren't they fathers? An intact family, mom and dad, first marriage each, only children of that relationship, still married. Just that standard. We're not asking for any kind of marital harmony, financial success, or reasonable expectations for the future for the children. We're just talking about people who actually manage to stay married. Oh, that just by itself is so rare. But we go the next step and look for children who are really going to amount to something someday, children who are really going places. Very, very rare. It's very rare. And overwhelmingly religious families. When you finally get to that point, you're going to find lots of Latter-day Saints, lots of Catholics, lots of Jews, lots of Buddhists and other religions from the Eastern and Southern Hemisphere. White Anglo-Saxon Protestants, not so much. Southern Baptists or other Bible church types, not so much. There will be there, but not so much. And as soon as you get away from religion, it's almost nobody. There's almost nobody who is successfully raising children in the Western world today, or at least in North America today, without a very strong religious tradition contributing to that. And I'm not I don't praise religion. I don't really have any use for religion, but I do want to give credit where it's due. To the extent that we're getting good kids, we're getting good kids because they're being raised in the church. I'd love for your kids to be raised in my church, but they're being raised in the church. They're being raised in a condition of moral seriousness. I want this to end. I want this to end. The self-extermination of the human race does not make sense. This is a horrible, horrible thing to happen for us, obviously, but there are so many things that we're doing at the same time that we're self-exterminating. Nanotechnology, biotechnology, neurophysiology, SIM, deep database. There are so many wonderful branches of human knowledge that are exploding right now, and we are on the verge of who knows what. And if you go and read all of the various ideas about singularities, remember a singularity is just a breakdown in the model. It means I don't know. That's all it really means. I don't know what's going to happen next. That's what it really means. But if you go and read about all of the places where we're approaching singularities in existing theoretical models, it's really exciting because it suggests that we could be on the cusp of a really big theoretical breakthrough. All of this stuff is so exciting. What a wonderful time to be alive. And I think about my friends in the Southern Hemisphere, and I'm so glad to have them. My friends in the parts of the world that we call the East, I'm so glad to have those friends because they are alive. They are avidly pursuing the gifts of human life, the gifts of reason, the gift of mind. They are on the upswing, on the optimism curve, and we are approaching the apogee, or maybe we're already on the downswing of the decadence curve. I am in love with that optimism that we see elsewhere in the world, and I really want to see it in you. I really want to see it in you. And that's why I'm preaching to you like this every Sunday, and that's why I'm talking about this fairly complex, arcane, elaborate moral doctrine, because I want you to adopt it. I want you to amend your ways. I want you to stop being a de facto Marxist, a Marxist by accident. I want you to be an individualist. I want you to be an egoist. I want you to be an egoist by conscious intent. I want you to be an egoist all the time. And that's why I want to teach you how to be an egoist all the time. But once you've amended your ways, what I want you to do is get married and have a lot of kids. A lot of kids. I mean, if you could have 6, I'd love it. If you could have 5, terrific. If you could have 4, that's wonderful. If it's just 3, oh well, good job. If it's only just 2 per your couple, that's okay too. But if you have fewer than 1 child, you yourself don't even reproduce yourself, then you are contributing to the auto-extermination of the human race. What I want is better people breeding busily. I want better human beings, and I can show you how to do better. What we're talking about is how to do better, and I'm not preaching at you from some moral high ground. To the contrary, I've pointed out to you 3 times the ways in which I fail just like everyone else. But our goal is not failure, our goal is success, and the way that we get to success is by pointing ourselves towards success. Turn around. Turn the basket back over, the basket that Marx unended, to make it easy for him to come up with a counter theory just by inverting everything else. Put it all back in the basket. Put it all upright. Human families are run by men. It's Mother's Day and 3 cheers for Mom, but human families are run by fathers. And we need to re-invert that idea, the idea that mothers are everything that matters in a family. We need to go back to the idea that's obtained for all of human history before Karl Marx, before feminism, and recognize that no father, no family. No family, no successful children, no successful children, no next generation, no next generation, no humanity. We are self-extinguishing like my imaginary bears on Mount Lemmon in Arizona. We are self-extinguishing, self-exsanguinating, self-exterminating. And that needs to change. And the person who's going to change it, it's you. It's you. I know you can do it. I believe in you. I'll do everything I can to help. And when the job is done, your children will thank you for it someday. Bless you. Thank you so much. My name is Greg Swann. This is the Church of Splendor, and I'm so glad you could come today. Have a wonderful Sunday. Have a happy Mother's Day. I'll talk to you next week.